The Grand Theft Auto series has introduced us to some of the most unforgettable characters in the gaming world, each with their own unique journey. But behind each character lies a story of where it all began, well before the opening missions of their respective games. From Michael and Trevors' fateful first meeting to Tommy Vercetti earning the infamous title of the Harwood Butcher. These are the stories that shaped Franklin, Niko, Tommy, and the rest of the characters that we know and love today. In this video, we'll uncover the origins of every GTA protagonist. We're going to be starting with Claude from Grand Theft Auto 3. Now, during the game, we know that Claude doesn't speak, so very little is known about his actual upbringing. Claude is a drifter who travels with no destination in mind. In 1992, Claude was involved in an illegal street racing ring and even owned an abandoned garage in San Fierro. Claude got romantically involved with Catalina, who had previously broken up with CJ. Catalina challenges the pair to a race in order to prove that CJ is just a jealous coward. Ultimately, Claude loses the race, and in doing so, he gives up the deed to his garage in San Fierro. From there, Claude and Catalina set off for Liberty City, a journey that would span across 9 long years, committing bank robberies through many American states, including Texas and New Mexico. Eventually, the pair arrived in Liberty City, taking part in yet another heist, but this time, Catalina decided that the journey with Claude had come to an end.
You're just small time.
Toni Cipriani was introduced to us in GTA Liberty City Stories. Toni was born and raised in the district of St. Mark's in Liberty City. Toni's father was a member of one of Liberty City's mafia families, and after his death at the hands of a rival gang, Toni lived with his mother in their family restaurant in St. Mark's, where she constantly pressured him, believing that he would never live up to his father's legacy. Determined to prove her wrong, Toni joined the Leone crime family to follow in his father's footsteps. Toni was ordered to kill a made man from a rival mafia family by his boss Salvatore Leone. Following this, Toni had to flee Liberty City and lay low for the next 4 years. Returning in 1998, he resumed work for the Leone crime family, earning Salvatore's trust and respect, and eventually became a capo. Next up, we have Tommy Vercetti from GTA Vice City. Tommy was born in Liberty City in 1951, living with his mother and father. Unfortunately, he had a bad relationship with his mother, so instead, Tommy would spend all his time with his father, who worked in a printing shop, and would use the help of young Tommy to clean the rollers. Originally, Tommy planned on following in his father's footsteps, but understood that it was just not who he was destined to be. By 1971, Tommy joined the Ferrelli crime family, one of the 3 most powerful mafia families in Liberty City at the time, and quickly rose through the ranks, becoming a made man by the time he was 20 years old. Sonny Ferrelli, the head of the family, sent Tommy on a mission to kill a man in Harwood. Upon arrival, Tommy found himself surrounded, realizing that he had been led into an ambush. Despite being outnumbered, Tommy managed to eliminate all the attackers, but unfortunately was arrested and sentenced to the death penalty. Fortunately for Tommy, he was able to avoid death row and instead was handed a 15-year prison sentence. It's speculated that Sonny Ferrelli was the one who ordered the ambush on Tommy due to his growing reputation and influence in Liberty City's underworld. This caused Sonny to become increasingly resentful towards him. Tommy served his 15-year prison sentence and earned the infamous title of the Harwood Butcher. Moving on to Victor Vance, the protagonist of GTA Vice City Stories. Vic Vance's early years are shrouded in mystery, though it's known his father came from the Dominican Republic and served as a soldier whose fate is unknown. His mother is a neglectful woman who left him and his brothers Lance and Pete to be raised by their aunt Enid. As the eldest sibling, Vic took on the role of protector, especially for his younger brother Pete, who struggled with asthma. To help pay for Pete's medical expenses, Vic enlisted in the US Army, eventually rising to the rank of corporal and being transferred to Vice City's base of Fort Baxter. Next up, we have Carl Johnson, or better known as CJ from GTA San Andreas. CJ was born in Los Santos to Beverly Johnson, who raised him and his 3 siblings without the help of their father, who was missing from the picture. CJ's older brother, Sean Sweet Johnson, became the man of the house, looking after CJ and his 2 younger siblings, Kendall and Brian. The Johnson family and childhood friends, Big Smoke and Ryder, grew up together on Grove Street. Sweet was helping support his family with money by robbing people, and eventually rose to power and became the leader of Grove Street families, recruiting Ryder, CJ, and possibly Brian into the gang. In 1985, Grove Street families were the most dominant gang in Los Santos when they began to feel the pressure of the corrupt police officers Frank Tenpenny and Eddie Pulaski. In 1987, Carl's younger brother Brian died. Though a cause of death was never revealed, the assumption was that he was likely killed in a gang-related attack. Carl's brother Sweet was adamant that CJ caused Brian's death. This accusation led to Carl's fallout with the gang and eventually moving to Liberty City. After moving to Liberty City, Carl began working with Joey Leone, the son of Salvatore Leone, the Don of the Leone crime family. The gang went into a decline for the next few years, and then in 1992, Beverly Johnson was killed in a drive-by shooting by the Ballers, dollars. With the unfortunate death of their mother, Sweet calls CJ and convinces him to return home for their mother's funeral. Niko Bellic was introduced to us in Grand Theft Auto 4, and he has one of the deepest and darkest backstories out of all the other protagonists. Niko Bellic was born in Yugoslavia in 1978 to a Serbian family. His father was an abusive alcoholic, and his mother, Milica Bellic, was deeply unhappy that her son grew up in such a harsh environment. As a child, Niko dreamed of becoming an astronaut, but his childhood was far from ideal. His family home didn't have electricity until he was 12 years old. He also had a brother who tragically died during the Yugoslav Wars, a conflict that consumed Niko's teenage years. The war fought between 1991 and 2001 saw Niko serve as a teenage soldier in the Serbian army, working as a helicopter pilot, infantryman, and a tank driver. His military unit of 15 men, mostly friends from his hometown, were ambushed, leaving only 3 survivors: Florian Kravic, Darko Brevic, and Niko himself. Convinced that either Florian or Darko betrayed them, Niko vowed to find the traitor and seek revenge to close this painful chapter of his life. The horrors of war, including the atrocities he witnessed and committed, left him deeply scarred, burdened with regret, depression, and emotional detachment. Sometime after his cousin Roman left for Liberty City, Niko discovered that his aunt, Roman's mother, had been raped and murdered. To protect Roman from the devastating truth, Niko told him that she died in a house fire, carrying the emotional burden of this lie. After the war, Niko struggled to find steady work. While his cousin Roman started a new life in America, Niko spent the next decade working in the European criminal underworld, which led to a period of incarceration. After his release, he became involved in a human trafficking ring led by Ray Bulgarian. During the smuggling operation to Italy, the boat carrying the trafficked individuals sank in the Adriatic Sea. Niko survived by swimming to safety, but Bulgarian believed that he deliberately sabotaged the mission and stole the money. Unable to escape Bulgarian's reach in Europe, Niko joined the merchant navy and spent 7 months aboard a cargo ship called the Platypus. The ship eventually brought Niko to Liberty City, where he hoped to leave the past behind and start over. Moving on to Johnny Klebitz, the protagonist of GTA 4's The Lost and Damned. Johnny was born in 1974 in Acton, Alderney, and grew up in a Jewish household alongside his brother Michael, who eventually became a soldier serving in Iraq. When Johnny was 10, Michael was friends with Billy Gray, a relationship that would later shape Johnny's life in unexpected ways. While Michael followed a straight path, he often disapproved Johnny's choices, especially with his connection to Billy and the Lost MC. Growing up, Johnny dreamed of joining the military, inspired by his brother. However, as a teenager, he became disillusioned with American foreign policy and abandoned those ambitions. Around this time, Billy Gray introduced Johnny to the Lost MC, pulling him into the world of outlaw bikers. By his later teens, Johnny's life had taken a much darker turn, marked by a string of criminal activities. Between 1991 and 1994, he faced charges of Grand Theft Auto, assault, and manslaughter, culminating in a prison sentence. During his sentence, he spent years punching license plates, and eventually in 2000, Johnny violated his parole, which further extended his time in the system. Despite his troubled past, Johnny took a different approach to the leadership within the Lost MC compared to Billy. While Billy pursued chaos and conflict, Johnny prioritized the club's survival and business, working closely with his best friend Jim Fitzgerald. However, his personal life was far from stable. Johnny had a troubled relationship with Ashley Butler, whose drug addiction and affair with Billy ended their romance. Despite this betrayal, Johnny's loyalty to Ashley endured, and he continued to protect her, even when she spiraled further out of control. Through it all, Johnny remained focused on holding the Lost MC together, navigating through the chaos around him. Luis Lopez is the protagonist of GTA 4's The Ballad of Gay Tony. Luis Lopez was born in 1983 in Northwood, Algonquin, to a Dominican family. His father, a US Marine, abandoned the family when Luis was young, leaving his mother, Adriana Lopez, to raise him and his older brother Ernesto and his younger sister Letta. Adriana also played a notable role in the upbringing of Luis's childhood friends, Armando Torres and Henrique Bardas. Luis grew up alongside neighborhood kids Oscar and Alonso Gomez, Teddy Benavides, and Willie Valerio, who, despite being 3 years older, introduced many younger kids into drug dealing. During this time, Henrique recalls Luis attempting to rap while he beatboxed, though Luis's poor rapping skills often made him a target of jokes. As a child, Luis was frequently getting into trouble with Armando and Henrique, including stealing alcohol from his principal's office, which landed them in detention. In 2000, at the age of 17, Luis was sent to juvenile hall after shooting and injuring a teacher who felt up his sister. A year later, in 2001, he was arrested for Grand Theft Auto, likely taking the fall for Armando and Henrique, leading leading to a prison sentence. While incarcerated, Luis worked to build muscle to avoid being targeted by other inmates. During his time in prison, his brother and sister both left Liberty City to start their own families, leaving Luis as his mother's primary source of financial support. In 2003, Luis was arrested again for assault, this time involving an incident with Oscar Gomez and Willie Valerio. Fortunately for him, he avoided further prison time. By 2005, at the age of 22, Luis accepted a job as a bodyguard for Tony Prince, and the two quickly developed a father and son bond. With this new chapter in his life, Luis distanced himself from the old gang, maintaining ties with only Armando and Henrique. He also gave up illegal cage fighting, though he would later return to it years later. Working for Gay Tony introduced Luis to a more glamorous and luxurious lifestyle, transforming his entire outlook on life. This shift earned him the label of yuppie from his old friends. Tony even paid for Luis to take helicopter flying lessons for business purposes, which we know by the piloting certificate displayed in his apartment. Despite his troubled past, Luis became a vital part of Tony's world, navigating the chaos of Liberty City's nightlife while forging a new identity for himself. Franklin Clinton is one of the three protagonists from GTA 5. Franklin was born in South Los Santos, San Andreas in 1988. His father left while his mother was still pregnant, but Franklin grew up hearing stories about his father's violent and abusive behavior, which likely drove Franklin's mother to a cocaine addiction. This addiction eventually led to her death when Franklin was just a young boy. After her passing, Franklin moved in with his grandparents, who became his primary caretakers. During this time, he became friends with Tanya Wiggins and JB Bradshaw. Despite being spoiled by his grandmother, Franklin began hustling on the streets. One of his early jobs was selling cigarettes with JB until his grandfather caught him and chased them both around South Los Santos. Following the death of his grandparents, Franklin and his aunt Denise moved into a house on Forum Drive, inherited through his grandmother's will. Franklin attended Davis High School, where he met Lamar Davis and Tanisha Jackson, but his time there was cut short after being expelled for assaulting a teacher. Around this time, Franklin's life shifted towards gang activity and petty crimes, including carjackings and small-time bank robberies with Lamar. During their first robbery, they stole $2,000, but a die pack explosion ruined all the money. During this period, Franklin met Jay, a kid from the neighborhood who would later join the military as an escape from the gang life. Franklin and Lamar also knew Pearlie and later her daughter Amani. These two would later appear in the Contract DLC, working for Franklin at the agency. But going back, Franklin briefly dated Tanisha Jackson, but their relationship ended after her brother's death, as Tanisha feared Franklin's criminal lifestyle would bring her harm. Franklin also worked for a local drug dealer named Marcus, who he eventually killed. His lifestyle choices caught up with him in 2008 when he was arrested and sentenced to prison. Following his release, Franklin decided to distance himself from being a gangbanger and decided to pursue more legitimate work. By 2013, Franklin started working for Armenian businessman Simeon Yetarian, who ran a car dealership as a front for a loan sharking and extortion business. Franklin and Lamar repossessed vehicles from clients who defaulted on their high interest loans. Michael DeSanta was born in 1965 in a trailer park somewhere in the Midwest. His childhood was far from privileged. He grew up in a trailer park with his parents. His father was an abusive alcoholic who eventually abandoned him, and his mother also left, leaving Michael to piece together conflicting stories about his father's departure, ranging from skipping town to being hit by a train or joining the Navy. In high school, Michael excelled as a quarterback for an all-state football team, even earning spots in the local newspaper for his standout performances. However, his temper and frequent injuries forced him to give it up. By his early 20s, Michael had turned to a life of crime, claiming that he had been in prison twice by the time he was 20. During his time in prison, he picked up various skills, including tattooing, famously inking his name on his cellmate's arse cheek. Michael's criminal career took off in 1988 with a $10,000 robbery at a small business near Carson City. As he refined his skills, he became a sharpshooter and an experienced heist leader. During this time, he teamed up with Lester Crest, who would go on to play a pivotal role in planning Michael's heists and other operations. Around this time, Michael began working with Trevor Philips, but before we delve into how they met, let's take a moment to step back and explore Trevor's backstory. Trevor Philips was born and raised in Canada near the US border, or as he calls it, the Canadian border region of America. Trevor's backstory is often told through Trevor himself, which questions the legitimacy of some of what he says, as it could easily be seen as exaggerations. As he recalls, Trevor grew up in 5 states, 2 countries, 14 different homes, 3 care homes, 2 correctional facilities with 8 fathers and 1 beautiful damaged flower of a mother. If this is true, then that would probably explain why he is the way that he is. From an early age, Trevor displayed violent tendencies and struggled to integrate with society. He recounts incidents such as sodomizing his hockey coach with a hockey stick and strangling a clarinet player with their own instrument. He also also claims to have killed animals and drifters during his youth. His father was physically abusive and eventually abandoned him at a shopping mall, which Trevor later burned down in retaliation. His mother was emotionally abusive and manipulative, which only further deepened his anger. Trevor also had a brother named Ryan who tragically died in an accident, or at least that's what Trevor calls it. Trevor was never really fond of his brother, so it's thought that he may be responsible for Ryan's death. Trevor dropped out of school, leaving him with limited knowledge, such as believing ancient Rome was a part of America. Despite his lack of education, he has exceptional mathematical skills, such as calculating the value of large quantities of gold instantly. Trevor also claims to have been the Canadian under-18 hockey champion and was on the verge of turning professional. Later, he discovered a talent for flying and enlisted in the Air Force to train as a fighter pilot. Trevor also said to Ron that one of the reasons for him wanting to enlist was to have the chance to drop the nuke. However, he was discharged just before completing his training after he was deemed mentally unstable. After leaving the military, Trevor became a drifter, committing petty crimes along the US-Canada border with no clear direction. Then, in the late 1980s, around the age of 20, Trevor began running a small air freight operation in North Yankton. It was here that Trevor met his future partner in crime, Michael Townley. Trevor was waiting on the runway for his employer to arrive, only expecting one person, but instead saw two cars approaching. Michael emerged from one, pursued by an older man whose car he had just stolen. The older man got out of the car and approached Trevor to tell him what happened, but instead of helping the man, Trevor decided to shoot the man in the eye with his flare gun, brutally killing him in the process. Michael and Trevor dumped the body in a nearby lake, with the stench of the flare still burning in the man's eye socket, causing the pair to throw up. This created a bond between the two, and they became friends and started a criminal partnership together. Trevor's first job with Michael involved robbing a check cashing place, but he was quickly caught when the clerk recognized him, leading to a 6-month prison sentence. Upon his release, the pair began a crime spree across the Midwest, though their partnership was met with challenges. Trevor's uncontrollable rage often led to reckless violence, while Michael's tendency to quote lines from Solomon Richard movies made him more recognizable. Then in 1991, Michael, Trevor, and another friend visited a strip club where they would meet Amanda. Amanda initially showed interest in the third man, but would eventually give Michael an opportunity. One thing led to another, and eventually Michael and Amanda would begin a romantic relationship. Michael uses his ill-gotten gains to buy Amanda implants to help with her stripping and prostitution career. Michael even took this opportunity to create his own prostitution racket. A few months down the line, and the pair tied the knot and became Mr. and Mrs. Townley. Eventually, they would go on to have 2 kids, Tracy and Jimmy, living happily together in a trailer park in the Midwest. This happy life didn't sit well with Trevor, who felt as though Michael had sidelined him, leaving the criminal lifestyle behind so that he could spend more time with his family. This caused a rift in their relationship, causing Michael to become frustrated with Trevor, fearing that he could snap at any moment, putting him and his family in danger. Trevor would eventually introduce another member to the crew, and that was Brad Snyder. Michael and Brad never saw eye to eye, and the two would often butt heads. This went on until one day Brad tried to convince Trevor that they should cut Michael off entirely and continue to do work without him. Although being as deranged as Trevor is, he still remained loyal to Michael and shut down the idea of betraying him. Fast forward to 2004, Michael has secretly organized a staged robbery with corrupt FIB agent Dave Norton. The plan was to have Trevor killed, Brad arrested, and Michael would take a bullet and pretend to bleed out. This would allow Michael to fake his death and offer him a chance to start fresh in a new place with a new name for him and his family. In return, Dave Norton would get all the glory for taking down the most wanted man in America. We all know how it went down. The plan went wrong. Trevor killed 2 people, one outside the entrance and the one that held Michael at gunpoint. This caused a panic and the local law enforcement were dispatched. This put pressure on the crew, but eventually with Michael's guidance, they were led right into the scope of Dave Norton, who fired his first shot, missing the intended target of Trevor and instead fatally wounding Brad. The second shot hit its mark on Michael's bulletproof vest and he would go on to bleed out. This left Trevor to face the police, but he was able to flee the scene and went into hiding, ending in the pair wrongly believing that one another are dead. Michael and his family were relocated to Los Santos, trading the caravan park for a giant mansion in Rockford Hills, taking on the new surname DeSanta. Unfortunately for Michael, this new life left him unfulfilled. He fell into depression, strained his marriage with an affair, and grew distant from his children. Desperate for answers, Michael turned to therapy, unloading his frustrations on a psychologist who seemed more interested in cashing checks than offering solutions. Michael had gained everything he thought he wanted, but he couldn't help but miss the excitement that his old life brought him. Meanwhile, Trevor managed to evade the police for several years and eventually settled down in Sandy Shores. This is where he met Ron Jakowski and Chef, who became business partners in his next venture with Trevor Philips Enterprises, specializing in meth production and arms smuggling. This in turn also fueled his crystal meth addiction. Throughout his various business dealings, he became enemies with a lot of people, including the Aztecas, the O'Neill brothers, and members of the Lost MC, one of these being Johnny Klebitz. Trevor and Johnny used to do business together, but that wouldn't last forever because Johnny's girlfriend Ashley would often cheat on him with Trevor in exchange for drugs. In 2012, a group of juggalos, Wade Herbert, Daisy Bell, Kush Chronic, and a few others had stopped in Sandy Shores to buy drugs, which is where they met Trevor. Trevor decided to take everyone except for Wade to the quarry. Instead of supplying them with what they wanted, it's implied that Trevor had murdered the entire group. Upon returning, Trevor never told Wade the truth about what happened, but instead would recruit him into Trevor Philips Enterprises. Despite Michael and Trevor believing that one another had been killed after the failed robbery in North Yankton, their paths were destined to cross again, setting the stage for their reunion. That leaves just two protagonists, Jason and Lucia. Unfortunately, the game's not out yet, so no one really knows what they're up to now, but I'd love to know your thoughts. What do you think Jason and Lucia are doing right now? If you did enjoy the video, be sure to like, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.